Previously on agentpalmer.com, the Rocket Recollection launched Fond Memories of the Argonauts, Clearing Out the Clutter of My Mind Volume 2, and it's nice to have friends like Professor Sarah who can always school you at a moment's notice. This is the Palmer Files, episode 79 with Renaissance man and storyteller Jerry J.B. author of many books including the freshly minted tale, The Mirror Man. We discuss the writing process, collaboration, details, outlines, idea hoarding, entering new mediums, how everything really boils down to storytelling, and much, much more. Are you ready? Let's do the show! Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 79th episode is Jerry J.B. author of The Mirror Man, his newest release, as well as co-author of The Chronos Interference and many other titles, both fiction and non. I first met him at a local convention, where he was sitting at a table with his Chronos Interference co-author Ed Miller. That is where I picked up the book, and I've read much of what both Jerry and Ed have published since. So, I am a fan, but in another age not so long ago, I interrogated Jerry in a long email Q&A for the blog, which still exists, and is a great then and now look at both Jerry and myself as far as conversations and back and forths go. Link in the description for those interested. In the meantime, what is in store for you is a crash course and a look behind the scenes at how my guest writes books and comes up with ideas. It is also a conversation about inspirations and influences. Starting with how writing business is like writing fiction, but also covering how sometimes passions find you, sequels, collaboration. There are really no true solo creative endeavors. The details, deadlines, treating artists like people, outlines, idea generation, and hoarding. How everything really can be distilled down to storytelling, and well, all of that and a whole lot more is coming your way shortly. But first, if you want to discuss the episode as you listen or afterwards, you can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest Jerry J.B. at JB_Manis, that's M-A-N-A-S, or at Jerry Manis. The JB is for his fiction works, and the Jerry is for his nonfiction works. You can find more information about my guest at jerrymanis.com for his nonfiction work, or at jbmanis.com for his fiction work. Don't forget, you can see all of my writings and rantings on agentpalmer.com, including a few reviews to some of my guests' previously published novels. And of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's turn the page. Jerry, you once told me that writing business can seem like science fiction. And I know that you have written both business and science fiction. So I was just wondering if you could expand on that for the audience, because you've written both and you've made that connection.
Absolutely. And in fact, it's funny because that statement I got at a convention. I was talking with Richard Dreyfuss from of Jaws and and other fame, and we were talking about writing. And I said. He said, so you write science? You just write science fiction? I said, well, I also write business. He said, well, isn't that a bit like science fiction? I said, come to think of it, it is. So I kind of stole that from him. But
well, good writers borrow, great writers steal. There you go.
That's true. It's true. But yeah, it's I got started writing articles, actually, nonfiction, and even the nonfiction was on lessons from history, from for instance, Napoleon's rise and fall, and even the nonfiction felt like fiction. And when you start getting into drawing lessons from all over the place, from history and science and whatever, and of course the way people manage companies, that's where it gets like science fiction. It's the delusional way in which people manage companies. It's literally like out of a Dilbert cartoon.
Yeah, and that seems to be and my go-to for this analogy that I'm about to use is always sports, which is Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig. It was they were covered in a different way by the media back then, so we just didn't know that they may or may not have been horrible people. I'm not casting aspersions. I'm just saying
Right.
that these are things we don't know versus today, where if a leader of a company, leader of a baseball team, it doesn't matter. We know if you're horrible or not. It just
true.
wasn't covered.
Yeah, yeah. And even these days, even with things being covered, sometimes we don't know the truth behind the scenes, or you apply one thing to everything. You know, everybody saw, Jack Welch turn GE around. So I thought, oh, let's be like Jack Welch and lay off half the workforce and, and do all these different things. It doesn't necessarily work for your organization.
Yeah, being a leader's tough. I've spent my entire professional career trying not to be in charge of people. Projects, sure, but trying not to be in charge of people. And I don't know where that comes from. I think maybe self-preservation.
It could be. Well, it's funny. I started out in the IT field, and then I moved into management, and then I really focused around Y2K on project management, leading programs in the Y2K conversion and the conversion to the euro currency when that all happened. And I got more into project management, and then I realized I like writing about it better than I like doing it.
Now, was writing a passion early on, or did you just you realized you liked writing about it better than doing it, or was it always kind of there?
Well, it's kind of funny you mention that, because when I was writing articles, I would write like, handy tips and things like that. And then I would start looking into lessons from history and writing articles about that, which is ironic since history was my worst subject in high school, but that's besides the point.
That's all about teachers.
That's true. It's all about teachers.
Yeah.
That's true. So I figured, who cares about the dates and the battles? What I want to know is why, and what would you do differently today, and things like that. So that's what I tried to bring into the picture. And I always think in terms of analogies and sort of abstract thinking. So I brought that together. But I wrote articles, and I thought that's what got me started in writing. And then but I was always fascinated with films and books, and I studied Alfred Hitchcock and Steven Spielberg, like the way some people study scripture. And so that really, got me interested. But then I remembered when I was a kid, like a teen, I would write my own little sci-fi stories. I wouldn't do anything with them, but I would actually write I had a number of sci-fi stories I wrote, and I forgot all about that. And I remembered, actually, I did kind of write back then.
All right,
I dabbled between writing and art and music.
So this is my question to you, because I was I guess I was like you. I was a bit of a dabbler, and I did a lot of poetry back then when I in my formative years. I attempted short stories.
Yeah.
But I can honestly say I do not think I ever finished even a short story back then. Like, I have since, I've written a couple short stories, but back then, when we're talking, before our teen years are over, I may have attempted many, but I don't think I ever finished one. Did you finish them?
I did finish several short stories. Of course, when I look back, they were kind of laughable. I was a kid. I was writing short stories and sci-fi stories, and in one, they were trying to avoid a nuclear weapon, and they hid behind some rocks. Like, that's going to help. Or they're in this futuristic starship, and then they fasten themselves with rope. And I thought back, not too realistic, but it was fun and creative.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting that these things end up, like, I've done this show for 70 plus episodes, and it always amazes me. My own journey tends to be more cyclical than you realize, but it's not until you start really looking back that those things occur to you.
Yeah. So sometimes you don't, and sometimes if you have a passion for something or a talent for something, it ends up finding you. It just might take a few decades. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you as well. You are an author of fiction and nonfiction, and I want to call you a writer as well. But you also have dabbled in other industries and different job titles. When somebody meets you for the first time and they say, "What do you do?" what do you tell them?
That's always a loaded question. If I don't know them very well, I'm going to meet them in passing. Sometimes I'll just say, to make it easy, I'll just say I'm a management consultant and I'm also an author.
Okay.
And usually they gear towards the author part, and they care less about the management consultant part. They say, "Oh, what do you write?" And again, I'll mention in passing, I write some nonfiction books, but since my passion is fiction, I usually end up leaning more towards that, and that's when they usually get more interested.
Okay, okay. And I mean, is the complicated one just a list of like, these are all the hats I can wear?
That's the complicated one.
Okay.
Even describing my so-called day job, even describing the job in management consulting, I wear a lot of hats there. It's a bit of writing and marketing and consulting and quality testing, all different things. But I think at the heart of a lot of what I do is writing and communicating, whether that's communicating through marketing materials, writing about how to be a better project manager or how to lead people better, or writing stories. And in a way, it's all storytelling.
I was going to say, storytelling seems to be, I mean, so would you simplify to call yourself a storyteller?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. It's that kind of runs across as a common theme, I think.
I've read a bunch of your stories, okay? And I think I've reviewed most of them on the blog. The one that introduced me to you, I believe, was the Kronos Interference. And
yeah.
I loved that book, but I wanted to ask you, you've written that was, you co-authored that one.
Yeah.
And so just how did that come about? Because when you as we're speaking, the Mirror Man is releasing, and that's, you have an idea and you write it. But the Kronos Interference is you and someone else. What's that like? Like, what's the genesis of the idea? How's that come together?
There was a lot of give and take, and it's funny. I met up with a friend of mine, her husband. I went to kindergarten with her, and we had a 35th reunion. I'm dating myself here, but so we were there, and her husband was talking about how he wanted to write a sci-fi book. He used to write sort of Star Trek short stories, not published, but would do that.
Yeah.
And he had this idea about a time travel story where a scientist travels back in time to kill Hitler, and it had a ripple effect. I mean, there's been loads of stories about killing Hitler,
yeah.
But what interested me was sort of the ripple effect, in which case, because something happened, well, then Kennedy lost the election, and because that happened, it created this whole ripple effect that he had to figure out how to undo. So I liked that concept, but I said, well, if this guy's a brilliant scientist, as much as I'm sure he hates Hitler, what's going to drive him to want to do that? So I started coming up with some ideas there. And I had been working on a story at the time about an underwater discovery. And I was talking with Ed Miller, who is my friend that we wrote it together. And I said, there might be a way we could actually combine these two. And we did. And that, sort of led to the whole tapestry that became the Kronos Interference. And it was interesting. It was fun because it was creative. We went back and forth. I did the primary writing on that. It was based on Ed's idea for a story. But what I would do is I would draft a chapter, send it to him. We would go back and forth and discuss what we want to happen and things. And I would go back and make revisions. And there were some other books I worked with Ed on where he did the first draft and then I did revisions and things. So I had already had written a number of books in the nonfiction market. So I had the background in the editing and all that stuff. So I kind of took the lead there. But at any rate, it was a collaborative effort, and we put our heads together, and I think we came up with a good story. And one of these days, we already have a sequel outline. So one of these days, I want to get back to that as everything keeps getting in the way.
How do you compare the collaborative nature of that versus the solo nature of your other things? Like, is it more fulfilling, more fun? Is it just the same but different?
It's I think it's in some ways it's fulfilling to be able to bounce things back and forth, to be able to share in the joy of successes, share in the expenses, and share in and just we always have a ball going to we do a lot of Comic-Cons together, so we like meeting the readers and talking with people, and we go to a lot of the events, and then we speak every year. Up until the pandemic, we were speaking every year at the Comic-Con events and always had fun with it. So either way, Ed wrote some of his books afterwards. I wrote some of mine, and then we do the events together. He sells his, I sell mine, and then we sell the ones we do together. We're working on another one together now too, actually. So we always collaborate. We're good friends, and and then we'll continue probably to do our own books and do some together.
So I will tell you, I don't know what to call myself, a sole creator. I don't think anything I've ever done has been solely non-collaborative, right? Because while you and Ed are, sharing the authorship of some of those projects, I think most of my blog posts are edited by someone else because I've got friends around me that I'm like, here's another pair of eyes, or even just the intros and outros for this podcast, I read them to someone else just for another. Like, I'm always, whether they want to or not, my friends get pulled into the collaboration because I can create in a vacuum, but I think it's just slightly better, just see it, even though it's not like maybe face to face, but I'm on a Skype call and I'm reading the next intro and I see his face and I go, well, this is new because I'm a podcaster. I'm speaking to a microphone most of the time. So seeing your face, clearly you didn't like that line. What is it about? And there's just something collaborative about it. Do you have a few people?
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, the book wouldn't be the same without them, actually. So I agree. I'm glad you brought that up because I don't think anybody writes in a total vacuum. I'm sure maybe some people do, but for me, I need the camaraderie and to be able to bounce things off of people, get opinions. And there's a small group of people. One of them is she was the editor on the Kronos Interference, and she since got out of editing to write her own books, but I always, bounce things off her, and she always gives me her thoughts and opinions. And what I like about it is she doesn't say, "Oh, it's great." She's candid with her advice. And there's another friend who's an excellent. She's a writer of nonfiction books, but she's an avid reader, and she's excellent at her insights. And especially, I was concerned about getting the right perspective with the Leela Mars character in the book to make sure I had the female perspective. And she really got me to change some things around in the book. She said, I don't think she would do this, or I don't think she would act that way. And, sometimes I would send it to her and she'd say, absolutely not. She'd say, you don't want to do that. I'm like, yeah, I guess and every time I thought about it, she was right. And so I went back and changed some things, and it wouldn't have been the same book without her input. And so I made sure to include that in the acknowledgments as well, because it really does help to have people to bounce things off of.
Now, I know you've written other female characters, but was she your first lead in The Mirror Man? I mean, she kind of a lead, a co-lead, but was she your first main?
She started out as a side character, and then there was so much depth that was added, and she became a co-lead, really.
Yeah.
The character in Atticus, the lead character, was a female detective, too. Okay. I spoke to a friend who was a female police officer, and it gave me a lot of good insights there in terms of what it's like going out into the field and things like that to make sure all the terminology was correct. And again, for The Mirror Man, I spoke with everybody from police officers to my brother as a physicist from the scientific aspects of it. And, and again, the one friend I had, she was able to give me some really good insights into the Leela character, and some of Leela's backstory actually came from her backstory, which really added a lot of depth to it, which was good.
Now, I want to talk about details for a moment. There's a lot of globetrotting in The Mirror Man, but you focus it as a part of it around your hometown.
Right.
And I have been I don't know if spy fiction from a European counts because everything's based in London, but I've been reading some Canadian authors that from Vancouver that base almost most of their stuff in Vancouver, and I wonder. I wanted to ask: is it familiarity that makes it easy for details, or is it there a pride that you want to include your local area in the narrative?
Well, it's sort of a little bit of both. I would say it's some of it is, they say write what you know. So I know people like reading about places in depth enough to feel like they're there. And I figure, well, what better place to write about than a place I'm familiar with and I can talk about and give people a sense of being there because I was there. Of course, I write a lot of other locations in my stories, and for that, there either it's a place I've been or I've had to do a lot of research. A few places I actually had to do virtual online tours and or watch the YouTube video, or I actually called somebody that works there and asked them some specific questions. So there's always a bit of fact that I mix in with the fiction in terms of location, history, things like that.
Now, is that something that you picked up from other authors or just other media?
Well, I think two big influences for me from a writing perspective were Ian Fleming and Michael Crichton. I started out reading all the Ian Fleming books, and I liked his sense of place, his sense of description, to the point where he would get into what meals Bond had, where you feel like you were there and you taste the meals and get a sense of the place. And they're almost like travelogues in addition to being stories.
Yeah.
But they weren't too much detail that slows it down. So that's why I tried to find that same balance. And Michael Crichton always injected enough historical fact or scientific fact to the point where you believe that something is real or could happen. And I always try to inject that as well. So I think a combination of those two sort of drove me in that direction.
Crichton is I love Crichton, and
Same
but
here.
He astounds me at times because I recently reread a bunch of his stuff, specifically Jurassic Park and The Lost World, and I was shocked. It had been a while. Okay, I'm a fan of the movies too. I like Spielberg, but the books are something different. But I was shocked to, I don't know, rediscover that The Lost World, while it's a full novel, reads like a short story or like a small play. Like it doesn't. You're holding a novel in your hands, but you finish it and you go, that what I did, like, it doesn't feel like you've read a novel. I almost felt like slightly tricked. Like what was that?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. I think that Lost World, I did get that feel. With Jurassic Park, I think it got into more depth. And another book I loved, I didn't care for the movie as much, was Sphere, which it had an excellent cast. I was surprised, but I thought the book, that and Jurassic Park, to me, both read like films, which I liked. I could envision the film playing in my head as I was reading it.
I think Sphere's one I know I read that. I think it's the curse of being a reader at a young age. As you take, I read Sphere way too young. I'll admit that right now. Okay, so I'm sure what I remember of the reading is not very much, and what my takeaway is not nearly what it should be, or what it would be if I pick it up again.
But I think The Lost World, if I remember correctly, I think that was written after the Jurassic Park film came out, and then he was under pressure to write a sequel. And I think it was one of those life imitating art, I think, where the films probably sort of inspired that sequel, the book in terms of that. So I think that felt more like an adaptation of a film, even though it was written as a book.
It could be, and I also think that, like, I don't think I've been having an internal monologue fight with myself for about the past 6 months, because I have these conversations with, you're a storyteller, you're an author, I will call you an artist. And for some reason, I have a hard time calling myself an artist, even though, like, I'm still manipulating things in a way and storytelling. But I do think, maybe removed from that, and maybe that's why I removed myself from it, we don't treat you as an artist well enough, because we read your book and then we want more, or we start creating an expectation, and you are no longer a human being. You are no longer Jerry. You're no longer J.B. You're just a machine to give me another story.
Right.
And
let's ask George R. R. Martin.
Well, that's the thing. Like, he's the most, visible and probably high profile of all of these things. But I think, I'll admit to being that fan. I'm pretty sure there's an email chain from me to you after I read the Chronos Interference being like, when's the next one?
Right.
And that's, I do that because I'm a fan, but I also do that because, I just want you to, I want you to know that. But I think it's also not like I wouldn't do that now. I think I've grown up even in that period of time because it's not fair to you.
Well, I think, anybody that's a fan of a book or that reads it is anxious, especially when you leave something that teases a sequel. You're kind of waiting for it. So I think I think basically what happened there was Ed and I both got into some different things. He wanted to write his young adult Star Trek type books. And then so I started writing something else. But we were both talking. We said, we really should get back to that because there are not quite a few readers of it that are waiting for it. And I had outlined a sequel that I thought addressed one issue I had with the ending, sort of where it was there was more that I wanted to put in, and then we were up against the clock to get it released and all that. But then we thought, well, then it would make it a little bit too long. But I think by putting it in the sequel, it actually works out perfectly because it explains a lot of the things that happened that I'm sure a lot of readers are probably asking of why did all this happen at the end? Why did they choose him without giving too much away?
Yeah.
There's a very good explanation for it, and that's what the sequel is all about. And we even have a title called The Chronos Prophecy. So I think it should be pretty interesting. I'm anxious to actually get started on it.
Now,
it's big and complex, but
well, I want to ask because I don't think a lot of people understand this. You mentioned up against a deadline, and I think a lot of people that want to maybe write their first novel, it's kind of very similar to like a band's first album. Like, you've got all the time in the world. This is like, you've spent years perfecting these songs or this story, and then you get it published either on CD or vinyl or in a book form. And then somebody's like, well, can you write another? And now all of a sudden you don't have all that time and that world. What's it like, you've written multiple books in many platforms, it's like, what's the, I don't know. Do you, what's the deadline stuff, the pressure,
Well, the difference is I've written a number of books for big publishers, from HarperCollins or Nelson Business was bought by HarperCollins and McGraw-Hill. And, when you have a deadline, usually I would outline a book. I would have a sense. And even with The Mirror Man, I had outlined, I'm an outliner. I had outlined every chapter and everything that was going to go in it. So by the time I was writing, I was filling in the blanks. But I also ended up, as always, straying from the outline. I might get 3/4 through and say, I think I want to go in this direction, and then that's fine. But anyway, to get back to your question, with the other books, I had these outlines, and it enabled me to stay with a deadline. And it was a hard deadline. There's two things: there's a target and a deadline. And when you're dealing with a publisher, it's a deadline. When you're writing an independently published book, it's a target. You're setting yourself a target. And, you can slip from it. Ideally, you want to still try to stick to it. And I think with this one, since it was our first fiction book together, and Ed's more of a sales guy than I. He's the one that's like the driver and says, hey, we got to get this out by this date because this is a good time to release this and all that. I think we were putting some self-imposed pressure on ourselves. I wanted to say, let's take another 3 months and really nail this ending. And get it right. So we were going back and forth, but in the end, we released it. We were both, I think, okay with the ending. If I had my druthers, I'd rather have gone back and spend a few more months. But I think it's just as well it'll end up in the sequel without making the first book too long.
All right. Well, when you're not writing, when you're not working, what are you doing?
When I'm not writing, writing to me is fun. It's even though it's work and it's what I do, it also feels like a hobby. And I guess that's the best thing when you're doing things that are creative and, you get, like Steven Spielberg always said, I dream for a living,
Yes.
It doesn't feel like work. It feels like enjoyment, fun. But as far as leisure time is concerned, Well, my daughter, who's 21, we bought her a horse, and that was the thing. She started college, so that was the deal. We said, well, okay, we'll buy it. I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd own a horse, but so we have the horse, and we go down to the barn, and a few times a week, and it's it's good, family leisure time to relax. I dabble on guitar. I don't do anything serious with it. I just mess around with music, art, I go back and forth. But these days, a lot of my spare time is spent coming up with ideas. When I'm not writing, I'm coming up with ideas for other stories, and that whole creative outlet is something I feel like I always need to be doing.
Well, then it begs this question, because I feel like as a creative, we're all in this same boat where it's like if you don't leave us to be writing or actually creating the thing, leave us alone for a half hour and we'll come up with 30 new ideas.
Right. Yeah.
And I want to ask, what's it? Because I think I overwhelm myself. I don't know if I'm an island or if I'm just like everyone else, but like I take some time and I step back and I go, well, I can't do all of these things. Why do I keep thinking up these things? And also I guess I'm an idea hoarder. Like I might revisit this, so I'll write it down. I don't want to lose it.
That's a great term, an idea hoarder. I like that.
But you can't. You sit down. 20 minutes later, you got 3 ideas. You can't chase all 3, right? Like what's
right.
How do you is that?
That's always a challenge. Like I know I'm going to want to do a sequel to The Mirror Man. I know I want to do a sequel to The Chronos Interference. Ed and I talked about doing some more of the space opera, the young adult space opera books. By the time we get to, I also outlined the book. The whole book is outlined called Dragon Island. It's sort of a Jurassic Park type story about a what appears to be a dragon in modern times that attacks a Puerto Rican island. And so it's again, we're moving into a little bit of a different genre, but it's still in the realm of adventure.
Yeah.
So I had a few number of other stories I want to get to. Plus, I'm doing some writing with some Marvel artists or artists that have worked pretty heavily with Marvel and DC. Guy Dorian Sr., I'm doing writing with him on graphic novels. I wrote the 3 issues from his core graphic novel line. He had done a lot of work on ROM and other series. And I'm working with Larry Hama on some things related to that. And he had pretty much created G.I. Joe and that whole universe and Wolverine and all that stuff. So it's been a learning experience. And especially working with somebody like Larry, who has such vast experience, sometimes I'll have all these crazy ideas and big and broad, and Larry's like, just keep it simple. And then again, he's worked with with everybody, it seems. So it's fun being able to work and collaborate with such illustrious writers and artists and do this. So that there's always something creative going on, and we've actually outlined a number of screenplays for TV series that are being pitched. So we'll see what happens with that too. Is
that the next? I mean, ignoring the fact that I'm just gonna blow by the fact that you just mentioned like 50 billion projects right there and ideas and stuff. But is that a goal or just a something you want to do to move into another medium?
Well, I think it's number one, it's fun. It's another medium. It's expanding my horizons in terms of writing. But I think at its root, I've always been fascinated with cinema. So any opportunity to create stories for a visual medium. And now that I've done that in the graphic novel world, which again is a visual medium, it's very different than all the telling that goes on in the written novels.
Is that a brain adjustment now that when you go to graphics and all of a sudden there's a show element that you didn't have before?
Yeah. I think less is more in terms of that, and sometimes the best words are no words, and let the pictures tell the story. And you see, you always have to remind yourself it's a visual medium, and it was a big adjustment going from nonfiction to fiction. And I would say it's an equally big adjustment going from writing fiction to writing for visual media, whether it's graphic novels and its close cousin, cinema or screenplays. And so I've written a few screenplays for short TV shows, and we had outlined an entire series. So we'll see what comes of that. I figure it's through osmosis you end up working and collaborating. It's enjoyable, and who knows what it can lead to. It may lead to nothing, or it may lead to some great opportunities. So we'll see what happens with it.
I mean, it just means that the blurb on the back of all of your books just continues to get longer.
Right.
That's...
I try to just condense it. And
Now, when you sit down to write, are you, typewriter, pen and paper, computer, tablet? Like, what's the nitty gritty of like, I've got to write this. What's going on?
Well, I don't have a typewriter,
okay.
But so I would say sometimes, usually I'll outline something in Word. When I'm just formulating ideas, sometimes I'll sit there with a notebook and a pen and just jot down some basic ideas that come to mind. Usually in my phone, I'm a big fan of Evernote.
Okay.
So I have the Evernote app on my phone, and I must have like thousands of entries in there. And usually I'll throw my ideas into there. And that's where a lot of times I'll do my outlining or brainstorming. And I have weekly calls, again, with Guy Dorian Sr. and his son, Guy Dorian Jr. is also a writer. And sometimes Larry Hama would join it. So it's like a writer's room. And we'll, again, come up with a whole list of ideas and which one, filter out which ones to pursue. Some of that came also from training I did with the Disney Institute, where they talked about how creativity is organized. And the first step is to come up with the most ideas unfiltered. And then the next step is to come up with the best ideas. And then step 3 is to come up with a plan to implement the ideas that you chose. So I think that holds true, that whole 3-step approach.
How often do you revisit the old Evernotes, right? Like the things that you wrote maybe 2 years ago that you just didn't do? Like, do you revisit that stuff, or are you always looking forward?
I do, actually. I kind of, you don't really need to do much tagging because the search is so good in that. So, but a lot of times I'll just throw in keywords into the article. So when I'm searching for it, like if I come up with something, I'll usually I'll put story ideas in there. So when I search story ideas, I'll have a whole list of things that come up. And so there's quite a few things. One of the ideas for the book, it's funny, one of the ideas for a book that I was thinking of, I knew I wasn't going to get to. It was going to be forever by the time I got to it. I like the concept for it, but executing it would have been a different story. So I actually included that in The Mirror Man as the book that the lead character was writing.
Okay.
So I volunteered one of my book ideas for that.
I like it. I think that's. I appreciate that you even look back at. I have currently I have a living document that's just called First Drafting, and it's where I do all of my drafting, but it's also where I throw my ideas, and I say this with the utmost respect to people that are completionists. In a perfect world, that document will never be under 50 pages. Right now, it's at like 95, and once I get some stuff edited and published, it'll come down again, and then I'll have more ideas. But I treat it as a living document because I just believe it will. There will never come a day when I open up that document and everything that I had been working on has now been published. It just seems so unlikely. But I know that.
Well,
yeah.
But one of the things I try to do is, I mean, a lot of things I go back to all the old ideas and I think, well, if it was that good, I would have stuck with it, or it would have, So sometimes they'll be the root of ideas. Sometimes I'll take some things from it and put it into something new.
Okay.
Sort of like Frankenstein's monster. But most of the time I go back and I look and I thought, well, there's a reason why that's on the scrap heap. Every once in a while I'll go back and I'll say, no, it wasn't a bad idea. I probably should have fleshed that out. But one of the things I did with this book, for instance, is I started with the characters. Instead of starting with a premise, I started with the characters and thought about, okay, what do I want this character to be? And I like the idea of a reclusive, not like the stereotypical reclusive writer, but somebody who's 35 years old, lives with his mother, watches old Alfred Hitchcock movies. It was a way for me to include a lot of the Hitchcock motifs and keep that as a running theme. And I thought, okay, well, the guy has this affliction where if he doesn't know how he got the affliction, he doesn't know where he got it. For as long as remember, if he touches somebody, he experiences their strongest memories. Doesn't just see them, but experiences them and feels every emotion and physical feeling. And so he spends his time avoiding people. I mean, he wears gloves if he goes out shopping. And so because of that, his only social life is online. So he plays these online virtual video games and things like that. So I thought, okay, now what if a guy like this has to come out of his shell and maybe sees something that's really gets to him and he has to come out of his shell because he's so moved that he has to help and feels he can make a difference. And now he's out there. Okay, well, what happens to him now that he's out there? And then that's when the rest of the story started taking effect. So I started asking a bunch of what if questions about the character. Whereas in the past, a lot of times I would try to come up with all these premises, but either way, I don't really begin a story until I have a log line that holds water. If I can come up with a one sentence log line that holds water, I'll think, okay, well, there's something now I can build from here. But if I can't describe it in one sentence, then I figure, okay, the story is too complex, or it's not really going to, if you can't describe it in one sentence and say, what's this about? Because that's the first thing everybody asks is, what's your book about? And you don't want to get into, well, this happens, and that happens, and this happens, and then their eyes start closing.
Well, I mean, you have a modern approach, not you, but you have a modern approach to the elevator pitch. The Mirror Man has a video trailer.
Yeah.
And when you sent it to me, I was blown away because I've read it, so I know everything, but yet I'm watching this trailer going like, well, maybe I should read it again. Like, that's new, right? Like that's because this. I think your book trailer might be the first book trailer I've ever seen.
Yeah, I've started to see a few of them, and I was reading some articles and they're saying, well, it's not a bad idea to do a book trailer. And since I think so cinematically to begin with, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a trailer that feels like a trailer to a movie? And so I worked with an organization called Film 14, and they specialize in cinematic trailers. And I spoke to them about what I wanted to do, and they didn't actually do these kind of short trailers. They did full scripted trailers where they hire actors and things like that. But he read the outline of the book and enjoyed it and said, we make an exception. And now I think they're going to start offering those kind of shorter trailers. But yeah, I wanted something that was sort of a teaser that was a little bit different. It might stand out from your typical book announcement.
And I'm not. I kind of rely on relationships to find out when a new book is coming out. But I mean, is the typical book announcement just like a small press release kind of a deal? Is that?
Well, it's a press release. It's social media. For instance, A.G. Riddle, who's written The Atlantis Gene and a number of other books. And I first heard about him when I saw the Facebook ad for The Atlantis Gene. I thought, well, that sounds like an interesting story. And I didn't know from him as an author. I didn't know from the book. I saw the Facebook ad, and you know what? I didn't do anything about it. And then after about the fourth or fifth time I saw the Facebook ad, I thought, I got to get this damn thing. I keep looking at it. It looks interesting, so I clicked on it. And I bought the book. And I liked it. And I thought, well, that's how most people discover new authors. Unless you're already a big follower of an author, if you're a follower of Dean Koontz or Stephen King, then you're going to, hear about it when their new book comes out, and then you're going to get it. But if you're an author that's written a few books, or if it's a fairly new author in the genre, the only way you're going to hear about it is through advertising, articles, bloggers, and then hopefully you'll come across it. And so that and the premise. If the premise is enough to make somebody say immediately, "Oh, that sounds like my kind of book," then that helps.
I almost don't want to ask this, but I have to.
Sure.
You're an author and a storyteller. We've established that. I have friends that do not read, and I don't understand them. But I do know that there is, for everybody that, like me, really enjoys the written word, there's people that could leave it completely.
Yeah.
How do you combat that as an author? Do you just go, well, I'm just going to double down on the people that do want to read? Or is there any kind of thought process to like, well, if my book is good enough, maybe I can convert them? Or is that not part of it?
Well, I think it's a little of both. I think that as any marketer would do, you want to be able to appeal to people that are, going to be in your niche, which means if people like Hitchcock, but Hitchcock is a film director. So if people like Hitchcock and they like reading, then of course that's going to be the ideal audience because it is very much, Hitchcockian motifs in this, or a touch of Bond, or, it was, I think somebody had referred to it as Hitchcock meets Bond, and I thought, okay, that's a pretty good description of it. But the thing is, I think there's always going to be people that are not readers, but if the story appeals to them, and that's another reason I wanted to do a book trailer also, and I handpicked the music for it because I wanted something that was Bernard Herrmann-esque, that felt Hitchcockian, because I thought, okay, if I could appeal to some Hitchcock fans through a book trailer, where they see that visual aspect, they hear the music, and they think, I wouldn't mind reading this, even if they're not much of a reader. So I think there's ways to appeal to people, just like many, many kids went out and bought Harry Potter, and they didn't read anything before that.
Okay.
And, so I think if you have a story that's appealing, and I always try to think cinematically when I'm writing anyway. I know the difference between writing fiction and writing screenplays, and there's a lot more detail behind what the characters are thinking in a book, but I still like to keep the scenes cinematic, and I think cinematically in terms of from a storytelling perspective. So hopefully that'll appeal to people that maybe aren't avid readers.
Yeah, I there was a time when I was like, I will find the book that will turn you into a reader. I'm not that person anymore, just because that's a lot of work to find that. I mean,
some people just never read; they just would rather watch the movie. Or I had a few people say, "Well, let me know if it comes out on audiobook," and I'm actually working on that now. So.
Okay, and is that? Have you done audiobooks for the other works?
Yeah. For the Chronos Interference, that's out on audiobook. I didn't do it for Atticus, but I did for the Chronos Interference, and. And that worked out well.
Okay, so you're an author, and when you are writing or reading it back in draft form, you're your own narrator, right?
Yeah.
So what's it like when you listen to an audiobook and for the first time your words are coming back to you in not your voice?
It's a little strange. I did an audio book for one of my nonfiction books, and I went into the studio for, I forget, it was a few days or a week. I went into the recording studio and read it and did the narration myself, and that worked out well. With fiction, and especially with my schedule right now, I don't have time to sit there going into the studio for days on end. And they have such good narrators now that are voice actors that can do different characters. In the Chronos Interference, one of the characters was based on Morgan Freeman, and the narrator actually sounded like Morgan Freeman when he was reading that character, which is kind of funny. But in this one, it's a matter of auditioning voice actors, and some of them get it. Some of them understand what you're trying to do with the scene, and then some of them, and you can't blame them. Some of them will read it cold, and they don't quite get the feeling of what's in the scene. But most of them, I think, were to get it. But it is weird hearing all the like different versions of what's in your head, because when I write, I cast all my characters, or I can't write them. For me to write the dialogue of a character, I have to envision them or feel, see what they feel like. So so with each of my characters, I have somebody in mind that I'm when I'm writing their dialogue that I'm thinking of. And I try to convey that to the narrators too, to say this is the feel I'm going for.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's got to be That's got to be like the most useful notes for them.
It is. I've gotten comments to say it's been extremely helpful for them. We're not used to getting that many notes. I even sent some video clips of actors from films, and I say, see this vibe. This is a vibe that the character should have in this scene.
Now, is that advice you give to other authors, like you casting your characters, even if it's just based off of real characters? It kind of helps you because you don't have to reinvent the wheel necessarily.
I do. I always, in fact, when we do the Comic-Con events, one of the things is writing compelling sci-fi and fantasy, and it really applies to any genre. But one of the tips that I give is to cast your characters. To when you're writing, think about in your head. And another tip is to read your story out loud, as you do each chapter, because it's a whole different feel reading it out loud with dialogue. Some things look good in writing, and then you say it, and you're tripping over your words trying to say it.
I mean, I do that for my blog posts, and I know it's not remotely the same kind of, genre, but like, if I can't read it, how can I expect somebody to? Well, if I can't read it out loud, how can I expect somebody else to read it? And they're not me. Like, I know I know what I'm going for.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember I read there was a famous document, and you can find it online. You can Google it, but there's a document that's an actual transcript of a 3-day event that Steven Spielberg, Lawrence Kasdan, the screenwriter, and George Lucas were together bouncing around the idea for Raiders of the Lost Ark. And they had some really, harebrained ideas that never made it, and then some were really good ideas. But it was really funny hearing the dialogue. And then they were showing the script, and you can see Harrison Ford crossed out half the lines, and he goes, "Nobody talks like this." So he would take like something that was like a long dialogue, and he would say, "Yep," like he would change the dialogue like one line or something. So
when you're doing the convention circuit, is there one question that you tend to get more than any other, either as an author or just as a speaker?
Well, we see a lot of the same, similar questions. One we get asked a lot usually is, where do you get your ideas from? That we see a lot is, where do you get your ideas for stories? And, that's one thing. And that's where usually I'll get into the idea of a log line. I'll get into elements of what should be in it, like your lead character. You need your lead character has to have a goal. What is they're trying to achieve? What are the stakes? So what happens if they don't achieve it? If there's no stakes, then who cares? And if it's personal, all the better. And then what's standing in the way, whether it's a person, the antagonist, or it's man against nature or whatever, but something has to be standing in the way of them achieving that goal. Then you start to have a story. And so I like to use as an example, like I'll say, somebody will say, I want to write a book, aliens are coming to invade Earth. And you think, okay, that's been done 1,000 times. Well, yeah, but these are big, hairy, fuzzy aliens. Or like, okay, well, that's, but if you say, the U.S. has made a dirty deal with aliens to fight the war on terror, but they didn't realize what the stakes were. Now all of a sudden you're starting to have a story, but you still don't have a story because you don't have any characters. You just have a premise. Yes, but then if you have a story about a young female journalist has to enlist her mobster ex-boyfriend to fight the alien conspiracy or something like that. Anyway, you start to have a character and you can have some irony in there. She has to, work with her mobster ex-boyfriend in order to, to solve something. Now you're starting to have a story because it's a character somebody might care about. And so I always, like to start there of, okay, come up with your premise, but then say, okay, who's the character? What makes them different? And where can the irony come from that they have to, like, when you think Indiana Jones, for instance, he had to, get together with his ex-girlfriend who he dumped in order to get what he wanted. Or Jaws, I always point to that. Roy Scheider played Chief Brody, and he wasn't just a sheriff; he was a water-phobic sheriff that had to go out in the open seas. So there's always that touch of irony, I think, that really strengthens a story.
I think for those interested, if you want to write a book, any kind of book, it's all there in this conversation. Make sure you can explain it in one sentence. Outlines will help. Casting your characters mentally or even writing it down will help. And think up and collect ideas. Now, you still have to do the legwork, but the foundation is there. And for those who have done it, like Jerry, as you've heard, I turned a corner as a fan, and I would suggest you do the same. Jerry is a person. He is a creative storyteller, and I have enjoyed the works of fiction I have read that he has created, but I do not want to add any more pressure. I want to tell him that I enjoy what he has done without pressing for more. As a creator, even as a blogger and podcaster, I understand how hard creating is. I am also a producer and editor of other people's projects and creations, and I can tell you being a creator is no easy task. It's not just as simple as anyone or everyone makes it seem. If it ever seems simple, as the case may be for people that do these things for a living or as a consistent hobby, like Jerry with books or myself with this blog and this podcast, know that it has become easier with experience, but that does not mean it is easy. This is why I have laid off even asking creators for more. This isn't even the demanding that we see some creators get. I feel like sometimes the ask is a lot, even if it's well-intentioned. The reason is because I've seen firsthand what a passion project can take out of a creator. And you don't know what that creator went through to create that thing you love. Perhaps it wasn't easy, but excruciating. I'd like to give them time to tell them it's good without demanding or even asking for more. It just seems fair. The creators I consume, from today's guest Jerry to Crichton to Dayton to Copeland to authors yet unread, they may have created the book I read or movie or TV show, as the case may be for you, as part of their livelihood or for their passion, but I don't take it for granted that it took more than just getting up in the morning to create the thing. So I'll be happy with what I have, and I urge you to do the same. That doesn't mean you can't tell those people that you respect, admire, enjoyed, or any other superlative you can think of about their work and the effect it had on you. I just ask that you refrain from immediately asking for more, even if it appears a sequel could be in the offing. So, what have you consumed, read, watched, listened to that you appreciated the creation of? For me, Jerry's Mirror Man is only one of the latest that I have enjoyed. Let me know what yours are, and if you check out the Mirror Man or the Chronos Interference, that's Chronos with a K, let me know what you think of those two. Thanks for listening to The Palmer Files, episode 79. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes, and now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest Jerry J.B. Manis at JB_Manis, that's MANAS, or at Jerry Manis. The JB is for his fiction work, and the Jerry is for his nonfiction work. Again, you can find more information about Jerry at jerrymanis.com for his nonfiction work, or at jbmanis.com, again that's MANAS, for his fiction work. Email can be sent to this show at thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. And remember, your home for all things Agent Palmer is agentpalmer.com. Jerry, do you have one final question for me?
Yeah, I guess one thing comes to mind is what inspires you to do the Agent Palmer blog? Like, what do you find most inspiring about it?
I think originally it was an exercise, and I've answered that before. Like, it was just I needed to write, and that's how it started. Now, this is going to sound weird. It's a way of life. Like I can't imagine not creating. And, you know, this podcast is wonderful, and I enjoy another medium and another you and I did a very long back and forth via email that I put into an interrogation that fit into the spy theme of the blog that was just a Q&A.
Right.
But it's not the same, right? Like I had some follow-ups for you, and I think it came together very well, but it's not this. And so this is fun, but the blog, I don't feel right if I'm not trying to write something or create something. And it's adapted, right? Like I used to try and review everything and make lists and write about everything. Now, that was also at a time when I was hitting publish all the time. Like I was doing 2 a week or 3 a week. When I dialed it back to, okay, I'm just going to do 1 a week, I started being a little more selective. So it's the special, as a writer, you can appreciate this. It's the sitting down and I get into the flow, and now all of a sudden, like 10 minutes later, I have 1,000 words, and clearly there's something here that I can share with everyone else.
Yeah.
But I think right now it's the sheer act of creation that keeps the blog going and keeps me invested and interested in it. And I selfishly, I can't, honestly and selfishly, I can't tell you it's because I want to share your book with the world or this movie with the world. It's because I want to create. That's
yeah. And is it possible that I know with me it is too, that it's not just creation, but also about connection, about connecting with people, with an audience, with other creators.
I think that's a part of it. One of the things that I've found as the blog has evolved and my writing has evolved is I've found myself more connected with the work. The whatever the book, the movie, the novel, the song, the whatever it is.
Yeah.
Part of that is the way the processes I've created and that we create for ourselves over doing this stuff for long enough. The book example is I read a book and I take notes as I go along.
Right.
And then I write up those notes because most of the time I don't have a digital copy, so I have to type out the notes in case I want to use any of those as quotes in the review or what have you. And that going back, one of the things I've found is going back and pulling those quotes. And also, look, I've said this before, I'll say it forever. Like books are supposed to be read, but they're also supposed to be clean. So like I pull out my phone, page 75, second paragraph, whatever. And so when I go back, I'm actually paging through the book again. I'm not looking for highlights. And that's another experience, and it's another touchstone to the story, right? Because most people, you watch a movie, and even if they're a reviewer, maybe you watch it again. But for the most part, I watch a movie, and then I watch it again, and I go back and pull the quotes, same as I do with the book. And that second touchstone of pausing it with closed captioning on or having the book open and literally typing the words that I read, either last week or yesterday. It's such another experience. And then I get to experience the book slightly differently because it's just my highlights. It's not necessarily the things that happen in the book. It could be a witty line that I really liked.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I did an analysis of Jaws and Jurassic Park when I was working on this dragon story idea. And I had created a spreadsheet with the story beats from both Jaws and Jurassic Park side by side. And I realized they're the same story. They're different environments, different characters. They're the same story. And so I was trying to get each of the story beats because I took a lot of inspiration from that. But it made me really appreciate that much more what went into it and how the story beats were assembled for maximum enjoyment and things like that. And Spielberg has said himself that Jaws is basically a remake of Duel. So.
I think some of that stuff I enjoy coming up with on my own. Like I don't. Yeah. Look, I'm as big a fan of the DVD commentary as maybe the next geek in line or the next nerd in line, right? It's not for everybody. But I also think that some of that stuff ruins the excitement of watching a movie 10 years later and going, oh my God, this is that movie from whatever. And making those connections together as opposed to hearing the director say, this is what this is. And there's a balance there because we all want to know more, but that moment of revelation when you put that together, like you can't touch that.
Sometimes it's like a magician revealing his secrets. It takes some of the magic out of the trick.
I just to quickly go back to your question, I can't imagine stopping it.
Great.
I guess, and I don't know.
That's how I feel about writing.
Well, I think part of it is that kind of why I think that's my writing. Like, and look, I've gotten this question here on this show. I've gotten it in public. I've gotten it in private. I've gotten it with family and friends. Like, when are you going to write a book? It's like I've got my process. I'm good. Yeah. Like, if the inspiration struck to create a novel or a book, I've already created a podcast and a blog. There's nothing to stop me, and I have the skill set, but I just don't have that spark, that inspiration to go chase a novel. Yeah, when I've got all this other stuff.
And for everybody, that one thing is different. That thing that sparks them, I think.
Yeah, and I guess I can now answer, when are you going to write your book? When I find the spark. I guess that's my...
Yeah, right. For a while, I did some editing too, and I edited the first couple books of a fantasy trilogy. The third one is still being worked on, and it was really, the author did an excellent job coming up with this fantasy trilogy, and I enjoyed the editing process and the story consulting process so much that for a while I thought about maybe I should just really focus on helping other people with their books and story consulting and stuff like that. And I keep getting back to writing.
But how long did that idea last before you're like, oh, I've got another idea I want to...
Exactly. That's what happened is, I finished the first book and I was halfway through the second and I thought, well, I have to get this idea out.